Hey y'all, welcome to lesson 5 of your first year of drum lessons. We're going to be back on the pad today. We're going to talk about some sticking patterns, but first let's review just a little bit what we did last time with the paradiddles, since we're going to kind of keep those in a holding pattern for right now, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep working on them. So we had single paradiddles. Paradiddle, 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 tap. Double paradiddles. Para, paradiddle, para, paradiddle, para, paradiddle, para, paradiddle, tap. Triple paradiddles. Para, para, paradiddle, para, para, paradiddle, para, para, paradiddle, para, para, paradiddle, tap. And then single paradiddle-diddles. Paradiddle-diddle, 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 tap. And then with the left hand, paradiddle-diddle, 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 tap. So you should still keep working on those patterns. The good news and bad news about learning something like drums is everything that we have done up until now, you should probably just work on all of it every day for the rest of your life. And the more stuff we learn, you should work on all that stuff every day for the rest of your life too. So that's a silly statement, right? Obviously, you can't do that. I can't do that. So you're going to have to pick and choose what to work on. Last time we talked about maybe slowing down with the lessons if you're having trouble keeping up with the lessons overall. But another thing that you can do is pick and choose, right? You can, if you say, okay, the paradiddles are freaking me out, but I really am feeling good about that double stroke roll. Okay, so put the paradiddles over there for a couple weeks, right? Work on your double stroke roll. You don't have to stop watching the lessons if one particular thing is holding you up, okay? So, but you should definitely be reviewing those paradiddle patterns because we're going to do more stuff with them a lot, okay? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do today is look at this handout called the Intro to Sticking Patterns. And the reason we work on sticking patterns is just to train our hands, really our brain, but train our body to be able to shift easily from singles to doubles, sometimes to triples and 4 notes at the same hand. I could argue that more than a few notes in a row is just an extended single, right? Like once you're doing several notes with the same hand, it's not really a sticking pattern anymore. Then it's just a series of notes with one hand. So we're going to do 16 of these today, but I want to tell you about, here's another book recommendation. I want to tell you about this book called Stick Control. This book is full of these sticking patterns, and pretty much most of the ones we're going to do today are based on ones on this first page, right? And the first 3 pages are all just a series of sticking patterns that you can do for the rest of your life, right? You could play these 3 pages as a warm-up every day, literally for the rest of your life, and it would be useful. Quickly, he gets into changing the rhythms around a little, and we're not even going to worry about that for today. But this book was written in, I should know this, 1935, with the copyright renewed in 63. Okay, so this book is getting on towards 100 years old, and it's in everybody's bag, right? Like this is one of those books you probably should get right now. Okay, so we're going to look at a few patterns based on that book on the sheet, and again, the sheet will be available for you to print out or look at on your device or whatever. Okay, so let's play through these. And I'll play through them really quickly just so you can see how they all work. And then at the end I'll repeat each one a few times. If you're still having trouble counting 16th notes out loud, you can feel free to write in the counts, right? So you can see it while you're playing. If you're still having trouble, you should stay on the first couple and then use the rest of these as practice for counting out loud, okay? So the first one is really simple. It's just a single stroke roll written as 16th notes, right? 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1, okay? Number 2, same thing, but now starting with the left hand. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Number 3 is just a double stroke roll written as 16th notes. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Number 4, same thing but now starting with left hand. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Number 5 is paradiddles. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Okay. Number 6, now we start to get into patterns that we haven't talked about before in our lessons. Number 6, there's 2 ways to think about it. And the next few, you can think about them this similar way. You can either think of them as a paradiddle inversion, which is how I was taught way back when. So I've got this pattern right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left. So I've still got a double and 2 singles. The double is just in the middle of the beat. The way that I think makes more sense to look at them nowadays is this is still just a paradiddle, it's just displaced. So instead of starting on the first note, we're starting on the second note. Instead of starting on the paradiddle, we're starting on the radiddle, paradiddle, right? Honestly, it doesn't even super matter because we're going to be counting them and we're not really going to be saying paradiddle. And this is almost a good time to start thinking about the paradiddle stickings as sticking patterns and not just paradiddle, right? You can get too locked into thinking of paradiddles as paradiddles, if that makes sense. Okay, so here's number 6. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Okay, number 7, the same kind of idea. This one, it's a little bit more obvious by looking at it. It looks like a backwards paradiddle, right? We start with the double. But, same thing, you can also think of it that it's just displaced, and instead of starting with the pa, we're starting with the diddle, right? So here's number 7. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Number 8 is another one of those paradiddle inversions, although this is the one that I think is the hardest to see as an inversion, is much easier to see as a displacement. Now here the double happens between the beat. It happens between the and the next beat, whatever, the 2, right? So you're essentially starting with the dull, if we're thinking of it as displaced, right? So dull, paradiddle, 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 right? This one, it's almost unhelpful to think of it as a paradiddle and to just try and look at the sticking pattern. So number 8, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Okay. Number 9, we start to get into more than just groups of 2. So number 9 is our first group of 3. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Number 10 is the same thing, starting with the left hand. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. Number 11 is basically the same thing, but now instead of the 3 notes together being the first thing we do, they're the last thing. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. 12 is the same thing, just starting with the left hand. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. Number 13 is still groups of 3, but now the groups of 3 are displaced. So we're going to start with a group of 2 because we're going to end with a group of 1, right? So we're kind of splitting up that group of 3. So we get 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. 14, the same thing, starting with the left hand. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. 15, now there's doubles and triples. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. That one's tricky. Number 16, just groups of 4. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1. Okay, so lastly today, we're going to learn about rests. We've talked about 8th notes and quarter notes and even 16th notes. And those let us play at different speeds. But we haven't yet talked about how to leave an actual space. And rests let us do that. A rest is essentially an anti-note. If a note tells you to play, so a quarter note tells you to play a note that's going to last 1 beat, a rest tells you to not play for 1 beat, okay? So going back to our quarter note equals 2 8th notes equals 2 8th notes, right? 8th notes, depending on where they are in a measure, you might see them with 1 beam at the top or 1 flag, but they're still 8th notes. One of the things that sometimes trips up some students is it doesn't matter how big or small notes are, or how far apart they are from each other, or if there's a bar line. Notes just keep going, and the rhythm is impacted only by the type of note they are, not by how they look graphically on the page, okay? So we have our quarter note and we have our quarter rest. This is how I draw mine. You'll see some in a second how they can look printed out, but this is a pretty standard way to see them handwritten. 8th notes, again, have that flag, and the 8th rest has a little flag and a line, kind of almost looks like a 7, right? So a quarter rest would equal 2 8th rests. Pretty simple, right? So we've got another worksheet today with quarter notes and 8th notes and quarter rests and 8th rests. We're going to be in 4/4, and since our time base is quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, there are only 4 possible variations that we can have on 1 beat. We can either have a quarter note, which takes up the whole beat, we already said that, 2 8th notes, and since 2 8th notes equal 1 quarter note, that also takes up 1 whole beat, an 8th rest and an 8th note, that equals 2 8th notes, which equals 1 quarter note, or a quarter rest. You wouldn't normally see an 8th note and then an 8th rest on a beat, because that would sound exactly the same for drummers as a quarter note. okay? For any other instrument that sustains, you would hear a longer note. Right here, so a quarter note on a trumpet might sound like bum, 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 and an eighth note might sound like bum, 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 bum. Whereas for us, they all sound the same. So there's no reason to write an eighth note and an eighth rest. So we're going to do a few examples. I'm gonna play them and count them out loud so you can see how they sound. Again, this will be available down below and should be above my head too. And we'll do them at this nice relaxed tempo. Okay, so I'm thinking 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And I've written in the counts and the sticking that you should use. So let's do a real brief thing on sticking. There are a few different sticking philosophies. I tend to prefer one based on what's called right hand lead. And that just means your right hand is going to be doing most of the primary notes in a measure. So your right hand will be on, if you're playing quarter notes, your right hand would be on the 1 and the 3. If you're playing on eighth notes, your right hand would be on all the numbers, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And if you're playing 16th notes, your right hand would be on all the numbers and all the ands. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and so on. When you start throwing rests into that, the right hand lead philosophy can get a little weird. The thing to remember about sticking is unless you're in, say, a drum line and you're all trying to play the same sticking together, there isn't exactly a right way and a wrong way. There are stickings that make more sense and stickings that don't make much sense. And that can be true on the drum pad. It can also be true on the drum set. Okay, so the sticking that I wrote in, it's based on a right hand lead. The most important thing is that you do a consistent sticking, just so you get used to, when you see a rhythm, you have an idea of what sticking will work. Okay. And then also I've written in the counts, I've only written the notes that are there and rests when they're on the beat. I haven't written in counts for the hidden eighth notes between the quarter notes. If you feel more comfortable with those, you can write them in, but this is the way I tend to count things. I tend to only count either the notes I'm playing or the rests that fall on a beat. Okay, so letter A, really simple. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Letter B, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Letter C, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Letter D, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Letter E, ready, go. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 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 Letter F, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and. Letter G, 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. Letter H, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Letter I. 1, 2, ready, go. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. 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 Letter J. 2, ready, go. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 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 Letter K. 2, ready, go. 1, 2 and 3 and 4. 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 And lastly, letter L. Ready, go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And likewise with the rudiments, you can play these at slower tempos and faster tempos. The important thing is that you're playing them rhythmically correct, right? A metronome is almost more important for these than for the rudiments because you're learning how to divide up the beat. An eighth note, essentially what we're doing, we're taking a beat which already is a measure subdivided into 4 beats, right? So we're taking one of those beats, which is already a subdivision, and we're subdividing it again into 2 pieces, and we can subdivide it into smaller pieces. But right now we're going back and forth between quarter notes and quarter rests and eighth notes and eighth rests. It's very important to get those relationships correct, right? And not have one element larger or smaller than any of the others. Okay, so that's gonna wrap up what we're doing for today. Keep working on your paradiddles. I know the music theory thing can be a little bit of a challenge. The nice thing is once you understand the music theory, then moving forward it gets easier. Okay, so this is a matter of practicing it enough until you know how to, count 1 ana, 2 ana, 3 ana, 4 ana, and then with things like rests, practice so you understand them. Okay, and then sticking patterns. Again, those are a thing you'll use for the rest of your life, right? So that's going to wrap us for today. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. And hit the notification bell. Super awesome if you do. And we're on for Friday at noon for our drum set lesson. And I will see you then. All right. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Love you all very much. Take care.